Introduction to Video Remote Interpreting, or VRI, for Entities. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division. Welcome! This course explains how businesses, civic organizations, and other entities can use video technology to provide communication access for individuals who are deaf by bringing in a qualified interpreter in a remote location. The right to communication access. Effective communication is one of the most common challenges that people who are deaf or hard of hearing experience. The right to communication access is protected by several federal laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, which identifies communication access as a reasonable accommodation. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These laws require all state, local, and federal government entities, organizations, healthcare providers, service providers, public schools, and many private businesses to provide access to effective communications so that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from a service, program, or entity. This includes the nearly 50 million people in the United States who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. The right to communication access is also protected by the Minnesota Human Rights Act and other state laws. In this next video, like many people who are deaf, has to think about communication access before attending community meetings. When a local interpreter was not available, VRI allowed her to voice her concerns.
Hi, I'm Mai. I'm pretty passionate about affordable housing, so I signed up to attend a public hearing on a proposed multifamily development in my neighborhood. I wanted to be sure that the developer planned to include key safety measures, like visual alerts in all apartments and a security system. I sent the city coordinator an email telling her I was planning to attend and that I was deaf and would need an interpreter. A couple of days before the hearing, I was notified that an interpreter wasn't available that day, but if I submitted my questions by mail, she'd make sure the developer answered them. I know that interpreters are scarce in my area, but I have a right to be part of the discussion. I wanted to ask my own questions. I sent the coordinator an email suggesting VRI and recommended an agency I've used in the past. The coordinator agreed to look into it and notified me the next day that she had arranged VRI for the hearing. The city provided a dedicated tablet and a stand, and the interpreter was on the monitor part of the live stream. It worked great. The next day, the coordinator sent me an email thanking me for introducing her to VRI. I hope this makes it easier for other deaf citizens to become more active in their communities.
The term effective communication is important. It means that the law recognizes that every person's hearing loss is different, and that what's effective for one person may not be effective for another. So an entity or organization can't make a blanket decision about how it will communicate with customers, employees, colleagues, and others who are deaf or hard of hearing. Hearing loss ranges from mild hearing loss to profoundly deaf. Because each person's experience of hearing loss is different, it makes sense that what's effective for one person may not be effective for another. Most people who lose their hearing later in life, such as veterans or seniors, will rely on reading and visual communications. They may communicate most effectively by using captioned phones, email, or written material, and communication access real-time translation, or CART, is often an excellent option for those longer or more complex interactions, such as medical appointments, business meetings, or community meetings. Only about 1% of people with hearing loss communicate primarily in American Sign Language, or ASL. Many ASL users were born deaf or lost all or most of their hearing early in life. ASL is their native language, like your native language might be Spanish or English. ASL is a visual language that transmits information as fully as any spoken language and is more effective for those who rely primarily on their vision to access information. Your role. Effective communication is a two-way street with shared responsibilities. The person who's deaf is responsible for notifying someone in your organization as soon as possible that they will need communication access. This gives you or someone else in your organization time to make arrangements. In most cases, the public or private entity is responsible for paying for services required to communicate effectively with individuals who are deaf, unless the communication is for religious or personal purposes. Once you've been notified the person has requested communication access, you are responsible for arranging that communication access. The first step is to gather more information. Ask the person how they prefer to communicate. After all, they know what works best for them. And if you're unclear about how to comply, ask the person for more information. Or check the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division website at mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. Or you can contact one of their experts by telephone or email. A key consideration will be how quickly the communication needs to happen, because many services need to be scheduled in advance. You and the person who is deaf should work together to determine what is the best option for the situation. You and the person who is deaf should also share responsibility for making sure you're getting the information you need during the communication. It can be difficult to find interpreting resources outside typical business hours. In this video, Alan explains how he used VRI to overcome this common challenge.
Hi, I'm Alan. I manage a manufacturing plant, and keeping my employees safe is a top priority. Every quarter, all plant employees have to complete mandatory safety training. And this can get complicated when you're operating 24 hours a day. Several first shift team members are deaf, so we bring in an on-site interpreter, no problem. But Sean's situation was more difficult. See, Sean is a team leader on the third shift who is also deaf. Ideally, he'd be completing the training alongside his crew, but it's tough to find an interpreter to come to the plant at midnight. So Sean was pretty flexible about coming in on his off time to complete the daytime training, but honestly, it was awkward. When Sean approached me about using a remote interpreter, I was a little nervous. I really didn't understand how it worked, but I trust Sean, and so I called the VRI service he recommended. The agency made sure we had the right technology and then scheduled a remote interpreter. We provided the presentation in advance, so the interpreter was prepared just like we did for the on-site interpreter earlier in the day. It worked perfectly. Sean shared some really important observations that we included in the session recap so everyone could benefit from his ideas. And now we use VRI almost exclusively for our quarterly trainings, as well as for performance management and other workplace communications. But we still bring in an on-site interpreter for equipment training because there's so much moving around. But thanks to VRI and Sean, I feel like we're really living up to our company's commitment to creating an inclusive environment for all employees.
Choosing a communication solution. The best communication solution will depend on the person's native language and how the individual who is deaf communicates best. If the person has significant visual limitations, how quickly you need to communicate, the purpose and the setting of that communication, if you will be moving around during the communication, your access to common video technology, and your access to stable, high-speed internet connections. Effective communication is different for each person, so don't make any assumptions. The best approach is to ask the expert, the person who is deaf. Ask what works for them and how they prefer to communicate. Don't be afraid of offending them. Most will appreciate being asked about their preferences. If the person who is deaf's native language is ASL, you will need assistance from a qualified ASL interpreter. Asking someone who knows a few signs to help you communicate does not comply with the law. Don't rely on written communication. Some ASL users are not proficient readers in their second language, such as English or Spanish. The same is true for many non-English speakers. There are many ways to work with a qualified interpreter. You can contact a referral agency to schedule an interpreter to come to your location to facilitate on-site communication with a customer, employee, or colleague. This is always preferred. However, depending on your location, it may be difficult to schedule an available interpreter, particularly in rural communities where interpreters are scarce. Thanks to the internet and improved video technology, you can now access a qualified interpreter by placing a video relay telephone call through a remote interpreter or arranging for a video remote interpreting session. Video relay services. Video relay service is also known as VRS. VRS is a video interpreting service that allows a person who is deaf to use a telephone to communicate in ASL with a hearing person in a different location. The person who is deaf uses a video phone, computer, or mobile device to visually connect with a qualified interpreter at a central site through a provider's app. The interpreter then calls the other party. Once the connection is made, the remote interpreter facilitates communication between the person who is deaf, who's using ASL, and the hearing consumer who's communicating in a spoken language. VRS is a free, on-demand service that's available 24 hours a day, anywhere in the United States. Immediate access is guaranteed. Video remote interpreting. Video remote interpreting, or VRI, facilitates in-person communications between a person who is deaf and a hearing person who are in the same location using video technology. In some situations, all three parties may be in different locations. Unlike VRS, a remote interpreter must be arranged in advance, just as you would if you were hiring an on-site interpreter. However, a referral agency may be able to fulfill your request on short notice, depending on interpreter availability. Access to qualified interpreters is dramatically increased because they can be located anywhere. Also, like an on-site interpreter, there is a fee for VRI services. In most cases, the business entity or organization requests and pays for the service through a direct billing arrangement with an interpreter referral service. Regina and her manager have formed a relationship with a specific qualified interpreter who understands Regina's complex project, as well as the organization's goal and culture. Regina explains how this benefits the company in this short video.
Hi, I'm Regina. I've used VRI many times, but it wasn't until I was asked to redesign the company's website that I realized how much I relied on it. This was a huge opportunity for me. I knew I had the technical know-how and the creativity, but I was worried about how I would get information from users. Written communications are okay, but sometimes you need to have a conversation to really understand what people like and don't like. With VRI, I can go to different offices to meet with someone or make a presentation and bring my computer and interpreter with me. Seamless. Fortunately, I had worked with Tanya in the past. She's a qualified interpreter at the VRI service our company uses. I started requesting Tanya whenever I needed an interpreter. I sent her materials in advance so she knew the topic we were going to discuss. She'd have a chance to ask me questions, and we agreed on signs for acronyms and key terms so we could communicate quickly during the meeting. It couldn't have been a better partnership. I bet you're wondering how the project went. Well, not to brag, but the new website won an award. How cool is that? Now I'm thinking about starting my own web design business. And I will definitely bring VRI.
To use VRI, you must have 3 things. First, you need a stable, high-speed internet connection. You can quickly check the strength of your connection by going to speedtest.net and follow the instructions. This test will provide you with your download and upload speed for operating VRI. For a group call, your upload speed should be a minimum of 600 kilobytes per second, and a download speed should be a minimum of 1 megabyte per second. Second, you need a video camera connected to a mobile device, laptop, or a computer connected to a monitor or screen. Because ASL is a visual language, a cell phone is not recommended because the screen size is too small to ensure accuracy. And third, you need a qualified interpreter. An interpreter referral agency can work with you to schedule the interpreter, confirm you have the technology you need, and answer your questions. If you don't have a relationship with a preferred referral agency, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services website at mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing has a list of providers. Make sure the referral agency only uses certified, qualified interpreters. Most VRI referral agencies have access to qualified interpreters with specialized expertise, such as healthcare or business. John, a realtor, is using VRI to communicate effectively with potential home buyers and to build his business.
Hi, I'm John. I've been a realtor for over 10 years. People always say that real estate is all about location, location, location. Well, I respectfully disagree. I think successful real estate is really about communication, communication, communication. I worked with a deaf client a few years ago. We used email and the occasional VRS call to communicate. And to be honest, there was a lot of pointing. Then last year, I started working with a new deaf client. He sent me an email asking me to arrange VRI for our initial meeting. I didn't know what he was talking about. I called the agency he recommended and I was amazed. I had no idea there was such a thing. We were able to really zero in on what the family was looking for, not just the neighborhood they wanted. I asked questions, they asked questions. It was great. Now, anytime I work with a deaf client, I routinely plan on at least 3 VRI calls. One to learn about their needs and to complete paperwork. One to follow up after they've toured some homes so I can fine-tune my search. And one to complete and sign closing documents. I've been working with the same VRI agency and interpreter ever since. It's been a great partnership. The agency has helped me to understand the communication challenges my clients face and ways I can help them. The interpreter is familiar with real estate terms, so communication is effective and efficient. Plus, there's more scheduling flexibility than with an on-site interpreter. This means it's easier to accommodate my clients' schedules. The deaf community is very tight-knit, so using VRI has led to satisfied customers, and you know what that leads to? New business opportunities.
When to use VRI. VRI can be used in most situations where you would schedule a qualified on-site interpreter. In fact, many healthcare facilities routinely use VRI to communicate with patients who are deaf and family members. VRI can be used to facilitate in-person communication during business meetings, presentations, at community events and activities, during in-home appointments, in educational settings, and in legal situations. VRI works best in well-lit areas where there are few distractions, including background noise, and where there is a strong, stable internet connection. It also helps to make sure everyone understands the role of the interpreter and how to take turns speaking. VRI has many benefits. Because VRI interpreters join you remotely, your location doesn't matter as long as you have adequate internet connection and the right technology. And because the referral agency has access to many qualified interpreters, VRI is a good alternative for evening or overnight events when scheduling a qualified on-site interpreter may be more challenging. This also means that you and the person who is deaf don't have to adjust your schedules to accommodate available local interpreting resources. VRI also expands your options if you prefer not to use a local interpreter. In some cases, VRI may be less expensive because there's no travel time or associated expenses involved. If you've not used a qualified interpreter before, you may have concerns about privacy and confidentiality. You can be assured that all certified qualified interpreters follow a strict code of ethics that prohibits them from sharing information about their clients or what is discussed in an interpreting situation. This includes personal information, private data, or confidential business information. Let's learn how one family therapist used VRI to help a father and his daughter navigate a sensitive situation by bringing in a qualified interpreter from outside their local community.
Hi, I'm Karen, and I'm a family therapist. A few months ago, I started working with Nikki, who was being bullied by some middle school classmates. We worked on some strategies, and she seems to be making progress. Her father asked for a family session. He's deaf and didn't want to use a local interpreter for privacy reasons. I certainly respect that, but I wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation. So I turned to the expert, Nikki's dad. He suggested using VRI. I'd never heard of it before, but said I'd check it out. Hunter gave me the name of a referral agency that he had worked with in the past and liked them, so I gave them a call. I was pleasantly surprised. The agency representative was very helpful. She explained how VRI works, confirmed that I already had the technology that I'd need, and answered my questions about privacy. I'd never worked with an interpreter before and didn't know what to expect. She told me the interpreter doesn't get involved in the conversation, and interpreters follow a strict code of ethics, including protecting client privacy. I'm so glad we did this, because now Hunter has a better understanding of Nikki's situation, and he was able to add some observations that were very helpful. In fact, we've decided to have a joint session every couple of months.
When VRI should not be used. While VRI is a good solution for many situations, it's not always the best choice. For example, an on-site interpreter is a better option if you will be moving around during the communication situation, such as if you're touring a facility. An on-site interpreter is also a better choice if the person who is deaf won't have direct access to the screen or the speaker is moving. Casual social settings, or settings where multiple people may be talking at the same time, are also better suited for an on-site interpreter. VRI also should not be used if the person who is deaf has significant vision loss or limited physical mobility that makes it difficult for the interpreter to see their signs easily. This requires a qualified interpreter who is certified in tactile interpreting. Finally, VRI should not be used if either the equipment is inadequate or the internet connection is not stable. A VRI referral agency can also answer questions you or your staff have about working effectively with customers who are deaf, employees, or colleagues. In this short video, Erin explains how the referral agency addressed her concerns about communicating with a patient's deaf family member.
I've been assigned to be Mary's physical therapist when she returns home from the rehab center after she broke her hip. I was nervous when I found out that Mary's daughter Annika was deaf, and she would be my main contact. I have to communicate a lot of technical information, and I wasn't sure how to do that. And to be honest, I've never worked with an interpreter or someone who was deaf. I didn't want to offend anyone by doing or saying the wrong thing. It has actually worked out great. Before Mary was even discharged, the healthcare agency had scheduled a remote interpreter to introduce me to Annika. They also suggested that I call the referral agency to make sure I understood the process. I'm glad I did. They made sure I had the right equipment and gave me some good tips about lighting and ways to communicate more effectively, like pausing so Annika had time to respond. Plus, they scheduled an interpreter who specializes in healthcare interpreting, so she would be able to communicate technical information very effectively. At our first meeting, the interpreter facilitated a conversation between Annika and I so we could come up with a plan for communicating Mary's progress, and agreed that I'd use a video relay service telephone call if I needed to get a hold of Annika in an emergency. Now I can focus on Mary. It's a relief to know that I have the right resources.
Here are a few things you can do to make the most of your VRI experience. First, consider the setting. If you have a choice, find a quiet, private setting. This minimizes background noise, which allows the interpreter to translate more effectively. Lighting is also important. A well-lit environment makes it easier for the interpreter to communicate with you and for you to follow the interpreter. Good technology makes a big difference. Most newer laptops and mobile devices have high-resolution screens and adequate cameras. If you are using older technology, upgrading to a separate digital video camera is relatively inexpensive and can have a significant impact. You will also need speakers on your device so you can access what the interpreter is saying. When you schedule the session, be sure to build in time to connect with the remote interpreter a few minutes before the meeting so you can make sure the technology is working properly and answer any questions the interpreter may have. Before the day of the VRI session, the referral service may request a written explanation of the meeting's purpose, any documents or visuals that will be referenced during the meeting, and other helpful information. The referral agency will forward it to the interpreter so they have time to prepare. This will help the session move efficiently. This is also a good strategy whenever you work with an on-site interpreter. Before the session begins, make sure your device is fully charged and plugged in and the camera is working. Confirm that your internet connection is strong. Connect with the interpreter before the meeting begins to check sightlines and lighting, and then make any adjustments as needed. During the session, make sure that you are comfortable with the interpreter and that you and the person who is deaf are getting the information you need. If you're not, stop the meeting and tell the interpreter there's an issue. The person who is deaf also shares this responsibility and should advocate for their needs during the session. The interpreter may also stop the meeting if they are unable to do the work for some reason. VRI is an excellent option for organizations of all sizes to provide communication access to deaf customers, employees, colleagues, and in this case, students. Patty explains how VRI allowed her to advise a deaf student and learn about other communication options along the way. Hi, I'm Patty. I've been a professor for a few years, and I really enjoy getting to know my students, especially my advisees. At the start of the semester, I learned that one of my new graduate advisees is deaf, and I don't know how to sign, so how could I be an effective advisor if we couldn't communicate regularly? I knew there was a staff interpreter on campus, but also a lot of demand, so I contacted Disability Services with my concerns, and they were very helpful. They explained that I could request that we have the staff interpreter for our meetings, and if he was available, he would come in person. And if he wasn't, they could schedule one of the video remote interpreters that regularly work with the university. They explained how it worked, they answered all my questions, and they verified that I had the right equipment in my office. Well, I've been meeting with my advisee, mostly with the VRI interpreter, every couple of weeks for the last 6 months. And it's going very well. He has a bright future ahead of him. I hadn't realized that there were services like VRI and let's see if I can get this right, Communication Access Real-Time Translation, or CART, that students and faculty could use. It's been eye-opening, and I have learned a lot along the way. The right to effective communication is a legal obligation. It is also an important way to build positive customer relationships and create a more inclusive environment for your deaf employees, colleagues, customers, clients, and constituents. VRI is an increasingly popular option because of its flexibility, availability, and expanded access to qualified interpreters with specialized expertise. You can learn more about VRI and other communication solutions on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services website at mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. You'll also find a list of qualified VRI service providers. You can also connect with a Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services staff member who can help you understand your options and identify possible solutions. Brought to you by the Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division.